This is Streets and People, conversations about people and projects shaping how we move. Find us at getaroundcaboolture.au. Today we're doing one of our People and Projects episodes, and I'm here in the studio with Nicolas Reid. I know Nicolas because on the professional social media platform there was a post about a transport book, a new one. I'm always looking for good transport books. It's called Transit by Design, a practical guide to planning public transport that works. I can highly recommend it. I'm based in Gubbi Gubbi in Queensland in Caboolture. Whereabouts are you, Nicolas?
I'm coming to you from Berlin currently. I spend most of my year in Germany, but I'm originally based in Auckland, New Zealand, and do spend some of the year there where I have a company and work in the transport planning sector.
So what made you interested in transport planning, and why does it still matter to you?
My first inklings of transport planning were probably when I finished high school and started commuting across the Harbour Bridge in Auckland to university in the central city each day. And I rapidly worked out that catching the bus was the best way to do that. And I would sit there and look at the queues of traffic and the masses of lanes on the northern motorway and all the people in cars and all the people in buses. And I thought, this is not the best way to do things, basically. After that, I spent a little bit of time in exchange to Buenos Aires, where I went to learn Spanish for a few months. That really opened my eyes to what a different sort of city can be like to live in when you have public transport and walkable places and a more human-focused transport system than an automobile-focused one.
And so you've obviously made this your career. What is it that matters to you about this?
It's a career and a passion project for me too. It seems to be such an important influence on people's daily lives, the transport and the way that our cities and our homes work, that it's just a really important thing where we can make really big gains in the quality of life, the amount of time and frustration people spend, and the access to opportunities and resources and jobs and services really depends so heavily on transport. And if we can make this better, we can make things a lot better for a lot of people.
You know, I've read a lot of transport books. Jarrett Walker's book, that's more technical, whereas Paul Mee's book, Transport in Suburbia, is theoretical and has some case studies. But your book is really good because it talks much more about the assumptions. It really felt like I was in a meeting with you as a consultant, and it says, don't do this and don't do that. I know people think this is going to be the answer. It's not going to be the answer, and this is the reason why. Does that feel right?
That is right. I must say I do owe a lot to both Paul Mees and Jarrett Walker. I studied with Paul Mees in Melbourne early on, and early in my career I worked with Jarrett Walker directly and learned a lot from them, read their books, and you will see that a lot of influence on what I've written there. I think what you've captured there is correct. It came about because we'd had in the Australasian sector a lot of really good wins on transport projects that had gone really well and delivered great outcomes, really efficient, making things better. And we'd also had a whole bunch that had gone completely wrong and turned right upside down and gone bad and basically disappeared because the project gets too bad, it just gets dropped and they move on, you forget about it. Something becomes a dirty word and you don't talk about this project or that project for another 10 years, and then regardless of how much you need it. So it's effectively getting down those experiences of what works and why, and what doesn't work and why. That's what I really tried to get in there.
And you cover not only buses, but heavy rail, light rail, funiculars, gondolas, monorails, everything is covered. And I thought it was a really nice, well-rounded approach, and there were key questions to ask. So don't worry about the mode. Focus on what outcome you want. So we're here in Caboolture in the outer suburbs of Brisbane. I gather you know it. Here we are in Caboolture, very car-dependent area. I want to know what you would like to share about transport in the outer suburbs.
I do work in the Queensland sector quite a lot and have done with our company MR Cagney, originally founded in Brisbane, now based in Auckland. And we've worked in Queensland, the other Australian states, and New Zealand in particular, certainly on the big mode-based rapid transit projects. one of the points you'll see in this book is that the concepts about service planning and route design are regardless of the mode. You have to get the basics right first. And then you'll see in the book that the questions on mode, whether it's rail or bus, and how those particulars operate, and how gondolas and the ferries and things, what are their unique things. That's the last chapter in the book, because that is the last thing you need to decide. You want to get all the service levels and the routing and the connections ready first, understand how that works, and then it will tell you what the right mode is to use effectively once you've laid all that out. So there is a tendency amongst people who know a bit about transit, and maybe they use it themselves, or they're responsible for politics or finance where they work with these things and they make these decisions. They know enough about it to know the kind of outcomes that they want from a transport system. And then they look at the transport systems that have those outcomes and they say, that's what we need. They go, oh, that's a train, because the train delivers the really good service quality and the speed and the connection and the nice stations and vehicles and things that we want. Or maybe that's a light rail, because this light rail thing, we've seen it in these development areas and they're really successful on this main street at Gold Coast or Sydney or whatever, so definitely that's what we want. The thing there is that people are kind of jumping to the conclusion of we need this mode because that mode encapsulates the things that they want out of the service. But what they really want is the service and the network design. That is really what delivers for the transit. So that's what I would say to the politicians and people who are listening here. Look at what you want out of a network and connectivity and the service levels first, and then work out how you deliver that with vehicles and corridors and the other sort of infrastructure bits. And you'll find out that quite often there's a huge trade-off between doing what you want out of a network and the hard infrastructure bits, because you're going to come up against a budget. You've got to fund these things, and basically going straight in for the big infrastructure will get you one small piece of the puzzle, whereas you really want to grow the whole puzzle overall.
So I've spoken with politicians, senior bureaucrats. I haven't spoken with treasuries, and everybody says it's Treasury's fault. If you wanted to put in a really good public transport system, what would be useful to know so that you can get Treasury to agree that this is a good use of funds?
Basically, the approach is to, I think, start from the ground up, to start from the hierarchy and get a bus network working really well first. And that's sometimes a little bit difficult because buses, they're not sexy, they're not a big ribbon cutting exercise. They can be, but generally, they're lumpen proletarian day-to-day things that don't get people excited. But they are the ones that deliver the most, almost exclusively, the best outcomes for people for the best price, because they are relatively cheap and stageable. You can add on small increments and improve things slowly over time. That's a really good way to approach this. So I would say get that in order first. Do your housekeeping. Get a really good bus network going, and you'll see the dividends on that. Then when you've got really busy corridors, or people are clamoring for, I need more services and better speed or whatever, then you can talk about bus lanes, busways, light rail, metros, etc., all the other things that come into play.
One of the challenges I often wonder about is transport modelling. I was speaking with a transport modeller recently, and one of the things he didn't realise, and he had designed a bus modelling framework. A very clever guy. I was explaining that there's involuntary non-drivers, flexi travellers who will just choose a form of transport that fits their needs, or the determined drivers. But even the determined drivers will become either flexi travellers if they're going to a football match, or involuntary non-drivers because something's gone wrong and they suddenly discover they have no capacity to drive or have a car. And people move between them all the time when you have more choice. So I wondered about the role of modelling and how that might impact how you plan a public transport network.
Yeah, modelling can be quite a difficult tool to use, because at the fundament of it, a model, you plug in the evidence you have on travel behaviours, and you add in where people live and where they work and where the schools are and things, and then you maybe make a few changes around what you're thinking about your transit service, or you add a new road in, or you change an intersection, and then you let the model run and you see how it response. And this is problematic when your models get calibrated and tested and all the information is historic data about how people used to do it. As Jared Walker likes to say, a model assumes that everyone will behave exactly as their parents did 20 or 30 years ago. So that's fine if you're doing something relatively small, like putting in a set of traffic lights or adding an extra lane on a piece of road. People are generally going to travel the same way and they're going to behave the same way. What it doesn't really do is pick up on major shifts of transport demand and mode share and people shifting to transit very well. And I've seen this throughout my career, that public transport projects consistently come in way higher than the predicted ridership. Because basically you're saying we've modeled a city which has average to poor public transport usage, and we put in a bit more public transport and it's still average to poor. It doesn't capture the fact that things shift fundamentally. And there's a hard task when you want to go into modeling and say we want to drastically change some of these assumptions, because they're like, what's the basis for that with the evidence? So it becomes a bit more speculative testing than a scientific testing. Not that transport modeling is particularly scientific when you get down to it. It is basically a lot of assumptions about how the world works and how people travel put together to describe the status quo.
So here we have a lot of stroads. So a stroad is a combination of a street and a road. Basically, you look at any of those big, horrible state roads and it's got fast cars, lots of traffic lights and homes and shops all in the same place. So it's really dangerous with a lot of high conflict areas where you've got people coming out of their driveway straight onto 60 kilometres an hour. Really difficult roads. And if you've got bus stops on either sides of that street, and you may or may not have a crossing. So there's one particular bus stop I'm thinking of in Caboolture where you've got old people's homes on opposite sides and there is no safe way for them to travel. And I thought, okay, well, if you could, for instance, put in a raised crossing on that multi-lane road, have you seen how that might affect the modelling and how that might affect ridership by chance?
It's definitely important fact that when you approach public transport, even a simple bus route, it is a whole system that includes the stops and the services and the access to the stops and across the street. And that is something that sort of slips out. Certainly people disregard the idea of service levels, but also the stopping points. And it's kind of an issue when you approach it from traffic engineering or traffic planning basis, which so much of our urban planning is based on, because there isn't an analog for a bus stop on a road network. You can basically join or exit a road at any point, any driveway, side street or whatever. You're not limited to a particular bus stop on and off. And in general terms, you can drive left straight ahead anywhere you need to on a traffic network. Obviously some things with highways and off-ramps and on-ramps that are a bit different. But basically, yeah, the idea that there's a bus stop on either side and you might not be able to cross between them doesn't come into general transport models at all. You can do some very localized micro-simulation models about stuff like that, but at the end of the day it's easier just to zoom in and say, look, we know that this is an issue. If people can't cross the street, they either can't get to the bus to get it in the first place, or they can't get home after they come back the other side, or worse. So a transport model's not going to tell you the value of the crossing at a bus stop, but there are more obvious ways to do that. The simple one we usually do is just a stop area study, a station area study. We basically look at the walking catchment, the number of places you can get to, and how far you have to go to find a safe crossing. Some of these highways you literally can't cross because there's fences. And you can map these things out and you say, okay, actually the bus stop's here, and the place I want to go to is just over the road. But I have to walk up, all the way up to the next crossing and go through an underpass or across the roads and come back down. That's a 700 metre deviation to get there. That place is pretty much no longer in the service area of that stop anymore. So you can map that out and you can shrink down those service areas, and sometimes we can show this and you're like, you've got a bus stop or a train station or what have you. We can look at it and you go, you've got 7 homes within the catchment of this because the network for connections, pedestrian crossings, walkways and paths is so limited that it's just shrunk that catchment area right down, and you're effectively serving nobody. The flip side is a simple crossing in the right place, maybe a pathway, a cut through, or improving a footpath on both sides of the street instead of one, which is a problem we deal with quite a lot. That can massively expand it. You say, all of a sudden we've got another 200 homes within walking distance of the stop because we put in 20 metres of formed footpath around the side of a street.
One of the things that is really challenging, particularly here in the outer suburbs, is how do you get to the bus stop? And people might want to ride a bike, in which case that has to be added on to a bike rack at the front of the bus. Bus stops are 12.5 metres, I think, and the buses are 12 metres. So I wondered whether you could get, say, a 9-metre bus for new routes or underserved routes where there wasn't a lot of high ridership, and put bike racks on the front.
You can get down to 6 or 7 metre long as still a sort of normal conventional bus. You'll see those in a lot of places like the hill towns of Italy where you just cannot get a physically larger vehicle through the winding lanes. And you can go right up to, I think about the longest you can get sort of standard is 24 metre long, double articulated, 3 sections with 2 bendy bits. Certainly a lot of places will run a range. I think the longest rigid ones in Brisbane are 14 and a bit metres long. 12.5 is a sort of a standard, but also 10, 8, 9 metres long. The bike racks on buses is an interesting thing. There are a few different ways to approach it. People do have bike racks on the front. Some places have them on the back, and some places let you take them inside, and they have racks or storage areas inside. In New Zealand, we have examples of all of those in different cities, and they all work relatively well. It's no real problem to have the standard sort of 12.5 metre bus with the couple of bike racks on the front. That still tends to work and fit within the bus stop. Certainly if you have a small one and a 10-metre bus or something. Some of the time it might be better just to have the longer bus and let people bring the bikes inside if there's room for that. There's some operational issues with the buses that sometimes the operators don't like it, and people don't like the idea that it might be a delay or slow down boarding and alighting because you could put the bike on and take it off. But normally it's not too much of a problem because you're doing that while other people are getting on the bus or off it. Often doesn't actually take much longer. So it's a workable situation. Bike storage facilities or staples at main bus stops too that people can ride to, particularly a main sort of station or a town centre. So you can ride there and catch your bus or your train or wherever to where you're going. It doesn't help you at the other side if you want the bike there as well to go a bit further. I did that a lot when I lived and studied in Melbourne. Taking my bike on the train allowed me to get anywhere because the trains are fairly extensive, but they do not have that last couple of mile reach to every corner of every suburb. So it definitely works out if you can take it with you.
So on our rail replacement services, there are no bus racks, and it's a lot of problem because obviously people do put the scooters and bikes on the train, and then you've got track works halfway along, and at the moment I think they're doing track works for 3 or 4 weeks during these holidays. Today it's the 15th of April for our listener, and that is a problem because I know I've certainly been caught out, and I think about people who have got casual jobs coming from a poor suburb in the outer area, and then there is not necessarily the bus connectivity at the other end. I've approached Brisbane City Council if they did a trial, I think in 2014, and the reply came back going, no, we're not going to do that. Even though I know other states do it, and obviously in New Zealand it hasn't been a problem. There's quite a strong kickback here. It wasn't seemed worthwhile. Have you had that experience in New Zealand or elsewhere? Were there operational issues?
It is a difficult one to convince people that it's worthwhile because it does have impacts on the operations, can make things a little slower. It has an impact on the design or the way the vehicles are configured, so there's cost there, and it becomes a too hard thing, so you have to convince people that it's worthwhile to put the extra time and effort into investing that. For a long time we had the issue in Auckland where it was effectively, we don't let bikes on buses in any way. We don't need that because you can just ride your bike instead of catching the bus, and it's not very useful, whereas other cities did have it. For example, Dunedin in the South Island always had bike racks on the buses because they have some enormous hills getting out of the city over to the suburbs that you basically can't ride a bike on, and you catch the bus over the hill and then get on your bike afterwards. One of the interesting things is the Auckland Northern Busway, which runs double-decker buses, has just started trialling bringing bikes inside. There was a slightly abortive idea to put the bike racks on the front of those busway buses, and there were some issues about loading and some concerns about pedestrian safety with that, because you have this extra rack on the front that isn't part of the design of the bus. So the trial was to actually just remove 2 seats in the front of the bus and the lower level and put flip-up seats instead, and there's space for 2 bikes. And that trial is going really well from what I understand. It's being well used by cyclists. There's not really any operational problems, and it seems to be delivering on what people hoped it would. So it's a little bit of a case of maybe trying something and giving it a decent trial, and then seeing if actually those fears are well founded or if maybe they're easy to manage.
And have you had any issues or heard of any issues of them catching a light, scoots, bikes, anything with the new e-devices?
No, I haven't heard of that in terms of those devices on board being a problem. We had a bit of a scare about electric buses catching fire. There was one involved in a crash recently at no fault of the bus. It was basically driven into by a speeding driver running a red light, and that caused a large fire. And there was a big scare about the electric buses, and there was an investigation. And it turned out that actually the bus wasn't burning at all. It was the car that crashed into it. There's a lot of concern about that, how that translates into actual risk or problems. I'm not sure if it's a bigger problem as people think.
We haven't talked so much about the contents of the book, but it's amazing to be able to speak with somebody who can really set out how to design transport. We've currently got track work going on because it's the school holidays, Easter to Anzac Day. What they've done is they've put a whole lot of track work on across the whole region, across the whole state. The transport expert said when it comes to roadworks, they stop the works during the day and then they restart them at night. But when it comes to track work, for some reason that approach doesn't happen. Is it about we don't think that train travellers deserve the same level of care as car drivers? Is it because we think train travellers won't complain as much as car travellers? What's your sense about why do we make it easier for people in cars in a way that we don't for any other transport mode?
It's definitely a thing. There are some practical reasons that a lot of road and highway networks, the individual pieces have alternates that you can use. It's relatively easy to divert a road, close the highway, but you can go down the main road for a couple of kilometres and come back on the highway while they're doing that work. With rail, that's usually much harder to do because there's usually not duplicates of it. Buses, it is much more straightforward. If you close a street for the bus, you can reroute around it in the same way you do with the roadworks. I think it is fair to say that there is a higher priority on maintaining traffic flows in and around construction, because one of the problems is with traffic networks, as a government, you don't really have control over where people drive. You don't have control over the vehicles are, effectively. You can close a piece of road, but you'll get congestion around it, and that congestion will spread out to the other pieces of the road. When you close down a railway, you do control the vehicles, you stop them and you don't run them, and it's very easy to do that. You don't have any congestion problems. One of the issues is maybe the desire to not see that congestion and not cause that problems for a lot of people on the road, so you want to try and minimize it as much as possible. So there is an element there that there's less value placed on maintaining rail and public transport. There's also probably an element of funding and money. It's very fair to say that across Australasia, main state highways in particular and roads have a lot bigger funding basis and higher maintenance and renewals regime, that they get constantly repaired and funded and upgraded and expanded, whereas railways and public transport have less of that. So there is a tendency to have to do things more cheaply, i.e. shut down the whole line and do all the piece of work in one go rather than spreading it out over several months of on-off changes. So a little bit of funding, a little bit of practicality stuff.
It sounds also political. You know, you can imagine all that congestion, people will blow up. What from transport in Germany, France, wherever, their approach that we don't do that we should do?
Yes, I think in the European context, particularly places like Berlin here, public transport is a default element of the city, of the streetscape. By that I mean good, high quality service come every couple of minutes that runs all day and night. I've effectively never looked at a timetable my time I've lived in Berlin, and I've never found myself at a tram stop or a bus stop where the bus isn't running. The few times that I'm out after midnight, I've not encountered, oh, it's too late, the bus isn't running anymore. That is an availability of service frequency, span of service, the concepts talk about in the book, and accessibility, that it's basically just there whenever anyone needs to use it. If not a underground line or a tram, there's a bus on every main road in the city. You can expect you just walk to the street and there will be a bus there, and it will come through every couple of minutes. That's just the kind of default access abundance. The same way you would approach cars in Australasia, you would expect that there is a drivable street everywhere, that you will be able to drive to any location at any time of day or night. They apply the same concept of what is standard or normal to public transport, and indeed in places like Berlin and Paris and other major cities, to cycling and walking as well. There's no streets that don't have a footpath because it's a suburb. That concept just doesn't exist here.
When I talk with people, they go, oh yeah, but it's different here in Queensland because we're really far apart.
There is an idea around density and the spread out of things, and for sure, there is a limit to where public transport can work. When things get too low density, you just haven't got enough people within the walking distance, within the catchment area of any stop or line you put on, for it to be feasible to operate it under any rational sort of design and budget. Having said that, there's a lot of land area across the Australian continent where the density is so low that public transport can't work. But if you flip that around and you say, how many people live there? What are the communities? It's a very small proportion. Australia, New Zealand are very highly urbanized countries. People live in cities and suburbs, and in cities and suburbs you do have sufficient density to run at least a good bus service, if not integrated with trains or light rail, metros, etc. So yes, there are big areas of sort of big block dispersed housing, farming communities, hobby farms, lifestyle blocks and things. That covers quite a lot of the area around the fringe of our cities, but it's actually a very small proportion of the population. So yes, there is maybe 5% of the state population that lives in a place where you just can't service public transport. But 95% you can. Any regular suburb or city that most people live in, 100% can make it work. There are a lot of 5-acre blocks, but there's not many people living on them because they're all 5 acres apart, effectively. So you do still want to serve those communities with something, and that's usually a bus on the main road through there, but not necessarily deviating around every side street to get down to every home and every farm and building. But that's the edge case. You can pick out these very small situations, many of them where something's not going to work, but for the most part it's still going to work. So you don't want to let those little edge cases unpick the whole concept. I talk about the sort of middle 80%. We don't have to aim to get 100% of every person, every resident, of 100% of their trips using transport. And if we try and do that, you're on hiding to nothing, because you'll be focusing so much on one extreme or the other, trying to deliver things that you can't. But if you pull it in and say, okay, we can aim for 80 or 90%, the core, the middle bit, you can deliver on that, and quite effectively too.
I've had such a great conversation. It's been so good to ask questions to somebody who really has a very solid knowledge of public transport. For a state politician, what is something you would like to share with them?
I would say find a way to get excited and get your communities excited about the basics of good transport, or at least expect that that can be something that each community actually deserves and can have. And for the most part, that's going to be buses, but buses that work well and buses that people can use. And that is, as I said earlier, it's not exactly a flash or sexy proposition, but it is one that does eventually resonate with residents and voters, that actually this is something you can deliver, and it can be delivered pretty quickly and easily and start paying off for the people that live in those communities. Less is more sometimes. Just adding more on doesn't always deliver, particularly if you've got a sort of average poor performing bus network. If you do a bit more of that, you usually still just have an average poor performing bus network that isn't really delivering despite adding on more and more costs. Looking at the service design and getting down into the nitty-gritty of network design, redesigning routes to be efficient and productive, and looking at the spans and the service frequencies. So really aiming for a regular, frequent service across most of the day and most of the evening, 7 days a week ideally is what you should be looking for. Look into getting that with the basis of the existing fleet and resources and operating budgets to start with, before trying to add more on, or indeed before advocating for a rail extension or a light rail line or a busway or something. Look at getting the base service really humming along to start with.
There is a councillor who's really interested in more bus services, and obviously buses are provided by the state. Unfortunately, our council, the minute there's any comment, they just go press play, we need more money from the state. It's quite a passive council, I would say. So for our local councillor who's interested in more public transport, what would you like to share with them?
They can advocate with the state for the sort of improvements they want out of network and to get better services, and then they can lead with the sorts of things that a local council is responsible for, their side of the equation, around bus stops, footpaths and crossings, making sure that people can actually get to and from the bus stop, they can catch the service, you can walk down the street, whether it's dry, whether it's raining, whether it's muddy or not. And indeed some of the other things are often around shelter and lighting that make the access to and from public transport much more user-friendly, and indeed in some places usable at all is a requirement.
And if someone's junior at council, presumably in the transport or maybe the planning team, what would you suggest?
Asking for things, pushing for them, looking for some of those improvements, or just raising it, not letting things slip to business as usual. Ask, if we're changing this intersection, why isn't there a crossing here? Or why are we widening this road and pushing the bus stop 200 metres further down the street in the process? Shouldn't we design it with it in the right place? Just ask these things, raise the questions, and sometimes they'll come to the fore. Sometimes they'll just be overlooked, and someone needs to say something to bring it forward.
Anything else you would like to share? Anything you wish I had asked that I hadn't? Some final comments or remarks?
Just on the general talk of public transport, we still come up with this idea that us Australians and New Zealanders, in fact you hear this in just about every country I've ever visited, there's an idea of some people that, oh, this just isn't part of our culture, or we don't do this, or we haven't done that with regard to using public transport, or the idea that we love our cars, we're in love with driving. We're not so much in love with cars as it's an arranged marriage. It's not a love affair. For the most part, we do what is easiest for us and what is actually viable for us to get to work or school or go shopping or whatever. We have to do what is going to work out. So a lot of the time, it's because we don't have the alternatives. You can't catch a bus that doesn't exist, or you can't get to a bus stop if you can't walk across the creek, or you can't walk down the highway with no footpath on it. So a lot of the time it is just a case of we do what is there and easy for us. That doesn't mean that's the best outcome, and it doesn't mean it's necessarily the one that works for people or even the one that they want. In the experience of, say, Auckland's new bus network, which has really improved the service design and the connectivity a lot, changed it from a commuter-focused system to one where you can get around the whole city. A lot of people are saying, I never would have caught the bus before, I hadn't really thought about it, it just wasn't me, but this is actually, not only is it good, it's better than my driving. This is faster, this is easier, this is more comfortable, less stress, and indeed money saving a lot of times, increasing fuel costs and things going on. It is a case a lot of the time of, if you just provide it something that works, people will use that. And they don't use it where you don't provide it, or you provide a very poor system.
People can't use a bridge if the bridge isn't built. That's been so fantastic. I've really learnt so much. It's been really helpful for me just to be able to understand a little bit more about transport and ask the questions that I wanted to ask. And I would encourage our listener to buy the book. It's a fantastic book. I really like it because it's just really practical.
Great. That's great to hear.
I mentioned to a cycling infrastructure colleague of mine, write a book exactly like this, but for mobility infrastructure. That's what you need to do. So I think it's going to be a model of book. So thank you very much for coming on the show.
Excellent. No, thank you. Thank you.
That's Streets and People. Thanks for listening. You can find more at getaroundcaboolture.au.